Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So as we unpeel the layers of the onion and understand who's behind this massive change, this push that we've seen, the loss of our freedoms as everything seems to be heading towards a great reset, we look at it and we understand that it's a lot of times it's the elites, it's the powerful families. Now, I wonder if you could ever get a perspective from people that are within those families. Well, joining me today is Eduard Habsburg. That's from the Habsburg dynasty. And I didn't know this actually before, doing some research, but the Habsburgs were actually, since ancient Rome, they're the largest ruling family in history. So aside from the ancient Romans, they had the largest empire across Europe, which was just incredible. Now that changed over the past, say, 100, 150 years or so. But so joining us, so Eduard is someone that is very, very involved. He's very active on social media, but he's someone that's going to help provide a perspective of from his shoes, what he sees in terms of how the elites are involved with this, what their overall plans are, but also what are really practical ways that we can fight back against this, what you'd call probably a satanic agenda that's trying to push us into this one world government, et cetera. So he has some very practical advice and ways that he thinks that we need to really kind of take seriously to return back to our traditional ways of living that will help really to give us strength to fight off this threat we have. So this is going to be a really interesting interview. I hope that you really enjoy it. Before we get started, though, make sure you're following me on social media at Man in America. Also, you can find me on LFA TV. If you go on Rumble, they've got a great channel, huge network, LFA TV. You can also find the show there. And every show is done as a podcast as well. So if you want to listen instead of watch, just go to your favorite podcast app and search for Man in America, and you'll find me there. All right, folks, let's jump into this interview with Eduard Habsburg. So, Eduard, it is a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. This is actually my first interview about my book.
Oh, very good. Very good. So let us first understand a little more about your family history. I'll be completely honest in saying that before kind of coming across your book and the potential interview, I wasn't that familiar with your family history, but because it's not one of the family names that we see commonly talked about, like the Rothschilds or some of the bigger European names. But through my research, I discovered that the Habsburg Empire was the largest empire, Western empire, since Rome, which was significant. So can you just give us a little bit of history of your family?
My family was a part of and influenced European history for about 800 years, from the 1270s to the 20th century. And the Habsburg family ruled in those centuries more or less Germany, Austria, for a time Spain, Netherlands, and for a longish time large parts of the world. In the famous empire where the sun didn't set. It's a family that got famous not for murder, massacre, and wars, but mostly by having huge, numerous families with many children, by performing marriage politics, and by being very Catholic. I think saying that Habsburg is Catholic is like saying that the Pope is Catholic. So yeah, that's more or less my family. And our heartland, so to speak, were Austria, very, very early on Switzerland, but we got kicked out of Switzerland in the 15th century. Yes, and most people would associate the Habsburgs with Vienna, with the castles there. And most Americans, if you go on Google and try to find sort of which search goes most with Habsburgs, is usually Habsburg jaw, which is that famous slightly deformed lower jaw that the Habsburgs had in those 150 years of the Spanish branch. And that's also the part of my family that I get most confronted with when people try to troll me on Twitter.
Actually, I did come across the Habsburg jaw in my research. And so
today on Twitter, somebody they discussed about me, and somebody said, well, they even lost the Habsburg chin. And I said, if you're disappointed, you can go and look at paintings from the 17th century.
Yes. So you've got a very unique position in understanding what's happening in the world. And, I think that, we've seen, in this world, we've seen the rise and fall of empires. The Roman Empire came and went. Your family empire kind of came, and I think it was around World War I when a lot of the power shifted with your family. And so that's, it's nothing new to have the rise and fall, but right now it feels like we're in a very different situation, I guess, in a lot of ways. If you're looking at the globalists and the communists and everything, and I see that you had a post recently about communism and the memorial in Hungary about communism. There's a very beautiful quote about communism and Christianity, which I thought was very good. And so, from your vantage point, how do you view what's happening in the world right now, and how does that tie into your book, which is really about the lessons and the rules and principles that we need to get through these turbulent times?
Yes. Well, one of the reasons I wrote the book was to try to answer the question: something is wrong with our world. Something is going wrong, and have we lost something? I'm not saying have we lost something when we kicked the monarchies out 100 years ago, but shouldn't we take a long look at the values that made these very strong empires work, and shouldn't we think about whether to implement them today in whatever way is right? Now, what really helped me with that was not only that my family is the Habsburg family, but also that I'm ambassador of Hungary right now to the Holy See, which my eyes are always on faith. My shoulders and my back are firmly planted in Hungary. Hungary is a country that stands for traditional family values, for faith, for sovereignty, for subsidiarity, a very important word in my book. So my job as diplomat for Hungary, the place where I work at the Holy See, and my roots that are in the Habsburg family really encouraged me to reach out, write a book, and encourage people to take a look at these values that we don't have anymore. And I came up with the so-called Habsburg way, the seven rules for turbulent times, which are basically the 7 principles of our family that I think largely have gone missing today. And I propose them. I propose that to anyone who reads the book to think about it. I mean, for instance, I give you one example. For me, one of the greatest Habsburgs was also one who ruled only very, very briefly in the worst possible moment, this blessed Emperor Karl. He was the last emperor of the Habsburgs. He came after the decades long empire of Franz Joseph. And he was only emperor for 1.5 years at the end of the First World War. He was a giant of faith. He was a deeply humble man, a loving father of 8 children and with a wonderful wife. And when he lay dying, and he died like a really deep man of faith, in lots of pain, and he offered up his pain for his people. He offered God his life for his people and for the peace of his people. Now look around and see whether you can imagine any politicians to go that far in your love, in your feeling of duty and responsibility. Even when Karl was in exile in Madeira and lay dying, his first thought was to his people. Now that, of course, comes from having been raised all your life for service. And I suppose that we have, thank God, a few good politicians, but we may have a few who may just want to get something out of it, and then afterwards find a pleasant place where they can earn a lot of money. And this is sometimes not the leaders that we feel can lead us through very difficult times. So all of this together makes me encourage people to read about the Habsburgs, what made them tick, and why that was not a bad thing. The United States are very strongly built on the myth of you have to fight tyranny, you have to fight kings, and all of this is bad. But most rulers were there to make their people live better. And this was historically so. They were bound to law, they were bound to their faith, they were raised to be servants. Very few rulers were really those crazy, giggling maniacs that we know from movies. And I can just say the Habsburgs lived for their people. They did everything for their people. And therefore, yes, the idea of my book is our society, our politicians, and every one of us can learn a bit from this and try to improve their life.
Folks, I've got a quick message for you. Right now, the world is very, very actively going through a process that the experts are calling de-dollarization. And look, I've been talking about this for well over a year now, but maybe you're now starting to see it in the mainstream because they're now talking about it because it's really happening. Well, what does this mean? Well, there's a few factors, but there's two main factors. One is that the BRICS nations, okay, this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a whole coalition, they are actively getting rid of the US dollar. They're stopping their trade in the US dollar. And this is significant because the dollar's losing its status as the global reserve currency and as the petrodollar. This is what gives our dollar its value. But the other thing is that we have an enemy that's within our own government. Biden and his administration, they are actively working to destroy the dollar. And you can see it in their actions that they're not trying to save the dollar. They're actually trying to destroy it because they want to roll out their central bank digital currency. So you have these two forces coming in both at the same time working to destroy the dollar, because what happens when that dollar gets destroyed? Well, literally your life savings, if they're sitting in the dollar, whether it's in a savings account or a bank account or the stock market or an IRA or a 401k, those savings, that money could literally be wiped out in a matter of days, weeks, even a couple of months. We're already seeing it with inflation, which is going to be much, much worse. If you're seeing the writing on the wall and you're thinking, what can I do to protect myself? Well, there's a few recommendations that I always have. One is just to make sure you've got your food. If you have land, ammunition, whatever it takes, real tangible assets. But fundamentally, the thing I recommend most is precious metals, gold and silver. Look, precious metals have survived the collapse of currencies, the rise and fall of civilization. And also a big factor in this is that the BRICS nations, their new currency they're introducing to replace the dollar, a lot of experts are saying it will be backed by commodities like precious metals. And so you can see there's going to be a stabilization and I believe a dramatic increase in the value of precious metals. Not to mention, look at the past 6 months, we're seeing 30% plus increase in the prices of silver and gold. So if you would go back and say you put 100 grand into silver 6 months ago, it could be worth well over $125,000, $130,000 because the dollar is losing its value. So folks, if you want someone that you can trust for buying your precious metals or gold and silver, I would highly recommend Dr. Kirk Elliott. So Dr. Kirk Elliott is a good friend of mine, but he's a strong Christian patriot. He understands what's happening in the world. He's got 2 PhDs, one in theology, one in economics. So it's the perfect blend of understanding, realistically, money in the end times. So if you want to set up a free consultation with Kirk's team, head on over to goldwithseth.com. So again, that's goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, it's goldwithseth.com. You go to the website, you scroll down. There's a simple form that you fill out right there. You put your email, name, contact information, and that sets you up for a free wealth consultation where you can talk to either Kirk or one of his experts to really understand what your options are. Or you can just call 720-605-3900 to take action today. Can you actually just kind of walk through a list of the 7 principles, right? The 7 rules for turbulent times.
Okay. Now, so the first one, of course, with the Habsburgs is get married and have lots of children. I can attest to this personally. I am married. I have 6 children. I have a very courageous wife. It's the greatest decision I've made in my life. It changes everything. It changes your outlook on life. It makes you immune also to the to intervention by the state. Family is a stronghold to live in, and the Habsburgs were a family. Now, my second point is be Catholic and practice your faith. The Habsburgs were Catholic. Now, you don't have to be Catholic to practice your faith. So all of this, of course, goes for anyone else who is strong in his Christian faith. You know, we've grown used to politicians trying not to show their faith in their political life, not in the States, but in Europe especially. The idea is that you shouldn't have a religion, then you are a good politician. But if someone has a faith, then I can know what I can hold him to. And I know what the criteria of his life are. Believe in the empire and in subsidiarity. Now, this is a very strong plaidoyer for the empire, not understood as the Star Wars empire, where one cackling maniac emperor suppresses everyone, but the empire as the Habsburgs lived it, which was a living together of different nations, different languages, different religions, different personalities, different sets of laws, of rules, under an emperor that had always to juggle, to balance, to make peace between. And this never encouraged you to be an evil dictator. You couldn't. You had to keep everybody alive. So believe in the empire, but most of all in subsidiarity. That is probably one of the most important words in my book. It is the principle that the United States are built upon. You are built upon bottom to top. You are built on the local level. You are not a centralistic nation. In theory, there are always tendencies to centralize, but in reality, the township and the family are the basis of your nation. And that's why we also look to the United States as a place of hope right now. Stand for law and justice and your subjects. This is the chapter where I speak a lot about how the Habsburgs felt bound to law and didn't interpret it in a creative way, and to justice and for their subjects. And then know who you are. This is the place where I speak about tradition and live accordingly. Know your roots, know where you come from, don't cut them all off. We can't invent ourselves anew. Man in the 20th century isn't neither more brilliant nor more wise than all those generations in the last 50,000 years that lived before us. Be brave in battle. I don't want everybody to be a soldier, but the Habsburgs had to stand in battle for a long time. As an emperor, you couldn't just do diplomacy and get married, but sometimes you had to put on the helmet, take out the sword, and lead your armies. Blessed Karl was in the field. He fought in the First World War. And of course, the last and most important thing that I might have begun with is die well. This is about the way the Habsburgs prepared for death. They were Catholics, and they knew that their last moment decided over their eternity. So they wanted to prepare for that moment, and they wanted people to pray for them after they had died. And I encourage everybody to see their life from their potential point of death, to say, is my life so that if I die tomorrow, I'm ready. I'm ready to go, and I'm ready to render my life back to God. There is a very touching story in my book. One of the 16 children of Empress Maria Theresia in the 18th century, they got a disease, the pox, I think smallpox, I suppose. It's a version of smallpox then. And when you got smallpox, there were two ways to get out, 3 ways. In the rarest case, you got out of it normally. Most probably you were scarred for life, and there was a good chance that you died. And so her father writes in the diary that one of his daughters, the moment she got the smallpox, she knew she was ill. She immediately asked for a priest and made a life confession. She died 2 days later. And just to know that even as a child Habsburg, you had this priority to die well, deep inside your matrix. And I think in Latin you say, quid agis prudenter agas et respice finem. Whatever you do, do it wisely and keep the end in sight. And yes, I could have put this at the first spot, but this is my 7 points. And I mean, in a way, funnily enough, afterwards, when I looked at the book, it says it's a self-help book. And Michael Knowles wrote in his endorsement that I redeemed the self-help book. Now, Habsburgs have done a lot over the centuries, but redeeming the self-help book is an achievement I'm rather proud of.
It's very funny. Michael Knowles, he's funny guy for sure. So,
yes.
One of the points that stood out to me that you're talking about there when you mentioned how basically don't fall for the wisdom and the arrogance of the young person that doesn't look back at the tens of thousands of years of culture and history. And I think that's one of the things that we've really lost in our modern civilization is our roots, right? And you talked about not severing your roots, and so like I'm sure that for you can probably trace your family tree back hundreds and hundreds of years, and know that you're the great grandson of this person, and but here in America, our country, in the grand scheme of things, we're like a 2-year-old child, right, compared to some of the countries that are so old. I mean, look at China, which has a 5,000-year culture, and if you look at the attack on humanity that we're experiencing right now, I think that one of the big parts of it is really separating us from our roots, separating us from the wisdom of the elders. And even what I can say with how things are done here, it's very typical for people, once they get to a certain age, they get put into a home somewhere. Whereas a lot of the people that I know that are from Europe, or the Europeans, or or from the Asian countries, their parents will, when the time is right, their parents come back with them and they take care of their parents until the end of their lives. Because imagine the opportunity to take the wisdom of the older generation and pass it to not just yourself, but to your children and to your children's children. I think that it's a very important thing that has been lost in our world today, is just the respect for antiquity. And if you look at a lot of the communist movements, which I think that's really what's behind a lot of what we're seeing today, it's really about destroying that antiquity. It's like when the Chinese Communist Party took over in China, they destroyed all of the cultural heritage of China because they knew that they would not be able to survive if that cultural heritage was sustained.
Yes. We live in a time where you are encouraged to be alone, without family bonds, without roots, without past, without beauty, without values, without anything, to reinvent yourself every 5 minutes. And I have to say, this is a lesson that the Catholic Church has learned in a very hard way, because suddenly in the 60s, 70s, they decided that they don't need all these old things, this old dusty stuff, that old Latin language, those old rites, those old forms of devotion and piety. We don't need that anymore. We're grown up. There was this idea that man has suddenly stepped across a threshold. Humanity is nearly there. We're nearly there to the perfect human being. We don't need all these old-fashioned things. And you're absolutely right. Communism tried to destroy everything that tied you to your past, to your roots, to beauty, to greatness, to sacrifice for the sake of others. So you asked at the beginning of your question, you asked, if you can't trace your family back centuries, how do you find these roots? And I can give you an example from the Habsburg family history. The Habsburgs had a really steep departure. They got one of the counts of Habsburg from Switzerland to become king of the Holy Roman Empire. But after that, his son wasn't and his grandson wasn't. They were kicked out again. And they were moping in Austria and wanting to get back into the leadership position. And what they did is they looked at the things they really aspired to, and they decided that they wanted to be that. So they invented for themselves a set of values, of traditional ideas. And for instance, they discovered a document apparently written by Emperor Nero that gave the ancestors of the Habsburgs a title. And that was, of course, a forgery. But it gave the Habsburgs the idea we come from something really old, even older than we come. We stand for values that are very old. And since then, they called themselves archdukes. That was a title that only exists in our family and in some science fiction novels, but in our family. And then, of course, the emperor declined the document, said, this is not real, this is a forgery. But 2 emperors later was a Habsburg, and he accepted the document as real. And since then, we are archdukes. Now, you can say this is in a way inventing something, but if you are cut off from your values, you have to find those that are really good and adopt them, take them into your identity and live according to them. That's one thing you can do. For me, it's easier because I know what my great-grandparents stood for. Through my father, I can look back at least 100 years, through my grandfather more. And I can read books about my family, and I know how my ancestors died for something. If you don't have that, then look up to people, values that inspire you, put them into your life and live them.
Yeah, that's
and in America, it's easy because you have a very strong founding myth. And it's something that we in Europe really look up to you because you have this strong myth.
And that's an interesting point, because it's good to be reminded of that, because while I can't say that I can trace my family lineage back to, 400 or 500 years and know exactly where I came from, what I can do is I can trace back to 1776 and say that our forefathers, they fought and died for our freedoms. And I think it's an interesting phenomena that's happening right now here in America, which I think that it's rippling, as you mentioned, to other countries in the world, where I think that in America, we got very comfortable. As one of my history teachers would say, we got fat, happy, and stupid, right? Life became so good, very opulent, not a lot of threats, our country will never fall. But over the past couple of years, I think that a lot of people have realized how fragile our freedom is. And, that we truly do have the threat of multiple totalitarian regimes and groups and organizations at our doorstep. And what I've seen, though, is that I've seen a massive revival in people seeking out the founding principles again. Where you see, where I live in a very rural area, and I see trucks driving, and they'll have a big flag that says like 1776. Right. It's very common. Yes. So you can see that even though, yes, a lot of Americans, we're kind of like mutts. You know what I mean? We're 10 different kind of ethnicities mixed together. And it's like, I've got German, I've got Irish, I've got Welsh, I've got, Scandinavian, I've got, probably some African. It all kind of mixes in, and we don't have those roots, but we do have the roots of America. We have the roots of the founding fathers. And it's a good reminder to see your perspective on that.
Seth, freedom is a very, very important world. We live in a time where, unfortunately, and I talk about this in my book, where you see people with an interest in control that are unfortunately very often far removed from democratic legitimation, are on higher and higher levels, try to offer security in exchange for freedom. And I see people who have, the Habsburgs were always listening to their people and to the lower levels. They were listening to the demands of the people, and they were listening to the grassroots level. One Habsburgs tried not to do that. That was Joseph II. And he had ideas with capital I. And in the name of these ideas, he imposed control measures and sanctions and centralism on his different people, because he thought it's good for them. Does that remind you of something? It definitely does me. And it went terribly wrong. He was only emperor for 10 years. In the end, he had to take back a lot of these measures because he realized this doesn't fit to man. Man needs freedom. Man needs respect from his leaders. You are not the subjects of your politicians. Your politicians are elected leaders. And be very worried if strongly supernatural forces decide upon what is happening in the country. Hungary is experiencing a bit of this in the European Union, where centralistic tendencies in Brussels try to tell us how to make our school laws, for instance. And this is always a bad sign. And I don't have to tell you that in the last 2 years, there were more traces of giving up freedom for security because you're afraid. And all of this, you will find things about this in my book too. So another reason to read it.
You know, and one question I have that I kind of have to ask, and I'll accept whatever answer you have, but you know, you're from a very powerful bloodline and lineage of European families, and as I've done my own research, and also a lot of the people that are watching this show, they're very well researched and they've looked into a lot of different things, and a lot of it, like you just mentioned, it really kind of goes to that there's this drive for more control from these people that are so far removed from us. It's unimaginable. The some of these families that the amount of castles and the wealth and the control that they have, and when you're kind of digging and asking, okay, who's behind this or what's behind this? A lot of people will they say, oh, it leads back. It's the World Economic Forum. It's the big globalist organizations. It's the UN. It's the Chinese Communist Party. But there's also then a lot of the powerful banking families, the Rothschilds, the Morgans, et cetera, that when you start to look at what they're doing, you can see that, a lot of what manifests in our society as a loss of freedom or a push for a very radical agenda, whether it has to do with the family or our culture, you can trace it back to some of these operatives coming from these very, very high levels of society. And so the question I have for you is just like, what is your perspective of that? Because you're someone that you see you're looking at things from a different vantage point than I can look at things. I'd love to hear just what you're seeing.
What I see is that man is basically made for family. And the level that man is happy with, the level that man can understand is family, homestead, township, county, state, nation in your case. But everything above that gets very hazy and very dangerous. People who want to save the entire world, the globe, the world climate, people who have so much money that they can afford to force their ideas onto people, and that have, listen to a Habsburg talking about democracy, that have no democratic legitimation, that are not controlled by democracy, but can just get everything that they want because they have this idea, and this idea now has to be the idea of everybody. This is very dangerous. This is a danger to democracy, and it's a danger to human beings. And again, I repeat it, everything that is above state or nation level should be handled with lots of caution. And we haven't had so far, if you look at your constitution, there is no real place for rich transnational players with enormous amounts of monies that have so much money that they can buy out an entire nation. That's not an idea that should be there. It is there. The problem is it's here. So what is the answer? The answer is go back to the roots, go back to the traditional values. As I said right in the beginning when I spoke about family, if you have 6 or 8 children and they are close with their family, with their parents, you eat together, you live together, you pray together, you talk together. This is a circle where the state can't interfere, where woke ideas from very high above can't easily get in. They will get in because we all carry around our mobiles and we all are on social media, but it's more difficult. If you're alone out there, if you're a single, if you have changing partners all the time, all that, the sort of lifestyle that is strongly encouraged nowadays, you are lost. You're lost. You're a ping pong ball in the wind. So go back to those traditional values. And the great thing is you have these very simple tools. You can build it up from the base, from the grassroots. You don't need someone up there to tell you how to do it. And as I read my book, there is a few ideas about that. What are values that really are the basis of our society?
It's really a profound yet simple way of looking at it. And I couldn't agree more. It's a, I feel like that if I could go back in time to when I was 20 years old, I would just say, get married and make it my goal to have, 10 children by 35. It's like, that's what I wish I could go back and do, because it's like, I want to populate the earth with more good people. That's how we're going to fight the globalists. So,
yes.
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 Edward, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll bring up a link to your book here, and this will be in the description below as well. But your book, you can pre-order it right now. It comes out April 16th. It's The Habsburg Way: 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. You can find it, all the major places that sell books. And I think that just what you stand for and what you're pushing forward is a very important message right now, because maybe it's a really good thing that we're being pushed to the edge of destruction, and it's going to cause us to go back to our roots and to go back to tradition and reject modernity and reject the globalist agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Isn't it a great idea that a Habsburg and an American YouTuber podcaster can talk about these topics and agree on them? Isn't that wonderful? That is truly globalist.
That's true. It is. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and take care. And please, we'll keep in touch.
God bless. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, folks, I've got a quick message for you. I have one simple question. If today you could no longer go purchase more food for your family with the food stores that you have in your home, how long would you be able to feed your family? Would it be a week, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, a year? This is a really important question, folks, that we have to be very realistic about, because the elites are proactively trying to put us into a state of food crisis and a state of famine. I'm sure you've seen all of the different food processing plants and farms that are blowing up. You've got cattle dying by the tens of thousands. They're proactively trying to collapse our food system because they know if they can control our food, they can control us. And so one of the best ways to be outside of their control is to be able to have our own stores of food and to be able to produce our own food. So there's really 2 things I would recommend. One is having heirloom seeds that you can grow your own food with, making sure that they're non-GMO heirloom seeds, that way you can harvest your seeds this year, use them next year. You can use these seeds for generations. Literally, that's how it will work. The other thing, though, is this high-quality storable food. This is food that's sitting somewhere. It's hidden in your basement, buried in your backyard, whatever it is. So that way, if there is a crisis, if there is an emergency, you might have 3 months set aside to get through that time period. And so for this, I would highly recommend a company called Heaven's Harvest. This is an amazing Christian-owned patriot company. And what they're doing is they're making high quality storable food. Again, a lot of the food companies, they say these food buckets, they're all about maximizing calories per dollar. They're filling the buckets with a bunch of filler and junk like sweet beverages, etc. But Heaven's Harvest, they focus on very high quality food that will last up to 25 years on the shelf. They also sell heirloom seeds. So you can buy all of your seed, you can buy all of your storable food. And look, folks, personally, I would recommend having at least 3 months per person in your household, if not 6 months or even a year. Again, depends on your budget, but I would definitely make sure you have some seeds, because those seeds could be worth their weight in gold, if not more, in the future. So to go ahead and do this right now, go open up a new tab and go to heavensharvest.com. And if you use the promo code Seth, that's SETH, promo code Seth, you'll save 15% off of your entire order. So again, folks, the time is running out, and you'd rather be 3 months or 1 year early than 1 day late. Again, heavensharvest.com and use promo code Seth to save 15% today.